All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing the big epic historical adventure horror novel, The Terror by Dan Simmons. That is horror novel, not horror novel. Historical horror novel, The Terror by Dan Simmons. And we'll also be discussing a little bit the miniseries, The Terror, based off of the book. And so that's where we're going today. That's the direction. Let's talk about the book itself first. Came out in 2007. Graphic design, covers. You know I love graphic design and cover illustration. I think this has a pretty elegant looking bit of artwork on it with some guys here frozen in the snow. We wrap it around. We've got a picture of our ship on the back, or one of our ships. It's just a really nice book overall. It's got a lot of different maps, a lot of detailed maps scattered throughout the book about the journey that these ships took, which we'll get in here in a minute. We'll get into here in a, we're not going to get into the ships. We'll get into talking about the ships. That's what I meant. So anyway, this book I wanted to read. It's winter. It's the middle of the winter time. This book review is coming out somewhere in the beginning of January. It's very cold here in Utah. I wanted to read a cold weather type book, a very wintry type book. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the book first. Well, we'll talk about both at the same time. Keep in mind, we will be bouncing different ideas off of each other from the movie and the book and the differences between them, and then just how awesome the book is altogether. And then I'll let you know what I thought of the movie. So, takes place in 1847. Dan Simmons wanted to write this book about two ships that were looking for the Northwest Passage. In other words, they were trying to sail these ships. They weren't sailing ships, actually. They were steamships. And they were steaming them and sailing them. A combination of sailing and steaming, let's just say that. Over the top of Canada and Alaska, and then they were going to drop down into Hawaii and whatnot. It was called The Search for the Northwest Passage. And the two ships that were involved were the Terror and the Erebus. And these two ships, as one might predict would happen, they got stuck in the ice up in the near the Arctic Circle, well, above the Arctic Circle, close to the north, in between the North Pole and Canada, let's just say that. They're stuck in the ice, or at least that's what we thought happened to them. We don't know. The real ships are based off, the story is based off of real ships and the real crewmen that disappeared and were never seen again, and so we don't know what really happened to them. But in this story, Dan Simmons has these ships stuck in the ice. The ice, it's a much more brutal winter and summer climate-wise. Temperatures of 70, 80 below zero. The ice is frozen over. The ships are stuck in the ice, and they're just stuck there. And it's a bad thing because they have to stay there for a long time. They have to wait for 6 months, a year before that ice thaws. And they're stuck in there. And in the story here, because since we don't really know what happened to it, in the story here, Dan Simmons takes his artistic license and creates a story of what he thinks might have happened. Well, plus he adds a little bit of a supernatural / horror element to what might have happened to these people once the ships were frozen in the ice. And it's cold. And this is where we're going to get a little bit of something between the book and the movie that I kind of... Okay, in the book, Dan Simmons, one of the reasons you read this book is because not only is it a gripping horror novel, but it's also a gripping piece of historical fiction. And it's written in such a way where the language is just beautiful to read. It's written in kind of an old-timey, a little bit of a style. Some of the conventions of the way that he constructs the book is a lot of the book is told through back and forth letters that people write to each other or supposedly may have written to each other. Of course, none of these letters ever reached their destination. Well, you know, whether it was the wives of these sailors living in England writing to them, or were them stuck on the ships writing back. Of course, none of this stuff ever made it. And then another one of the writing conventions he uses, and normally, we'll talk about the first one. Normally, I don't care for books that use the whole, I'm going to write letters back and forth between my characters to tell the story type thing. I know Dracula did that, and I hated it. This does it, and I actually quite liked it. Another story convention that I'm not a big fan of is the back and forth in time. Like, we start the novel here towards the end of the action, and then we jump back to 40 years to when the, you know, or before the guys even set sail. We get to know them before they set sail. Then we jump to when they first launched the ships, and then we jump to the end, and then we jump back to the beginning. And I mean, there's just a lot of time skips in this. Another writing convention, I like a linear story. I want to plow from beginning to end. I don't want to go all like, this book does that well, and normally that's another thing that I don't like. This book does that well. If you followed my channel and if you've watched any of my top 10 all-time favorite book videos, you know that this finishes really high. So despite the fact that this book does a lot of things that I hate, it actually does them well enough that it launched it into one of my top 10, 20 books of all time. But anyway, the story is the book, what I was going to say. I started off talking about the temperature, and I was going to start off talking about that. The book takes place in a hella cold climate, 70, 80 below zero. The book, and Dan Simmons does a great job of capturing just the horror and savagery of the cold weather. And I know what it can be like, because I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. I have been outside in 60 degrees below weather. I've been outside in 45 degrees below, 13 degrees below. I know what it feels like, the differences that those feel like. And I'm telling you, Dan Simmons does a great job of describing that. One of the things that he describes in this book is these men are trapped in these ships, in the ice, in this terribly cold weather. They go outside and it's 80 below zero. They step back into the ship and it's a little bit warmer. It's like 15 below zero inside the ship. And you get a sense of just how cold these men were in these ships. And we'll talk a little bit about the men in a minute in the plot of the book. You get a sense of how cold everything was the way Dan Simmons describes it. In the movie, you don't get that at all. It looks like it's cold. I mean, it's like they're filming it in snow or fake snow or a soundstage with fake snow. But there's no, like, when they breathe, there's no, like, poofs of breath coming out of their air. It looks like they're just in a nice, balmy climate pretending to be cold. And even when they went outside, they're cold and they wear some jackets. It doesn't look like the type of jackets you would really wear in that type of cold. But when they step inside, they take all their jackets off and they're just kind of like in their regular uniforms. And I'm like, no, Dan Simmons describes it as cold as even in the ships, it's cold as shit. Anyway, the ships are stranded in the ice. The crux of the whole story is that's horrible enough, especially when food runs out and the different sailors do bad things to each other. I won't get into a lot of what happens graphic. It's very bloody. It's very horrific. The way that these sailors end up starting to treat each other as things get more dire and dire. The other part of the horror story is there's a creature of some kind, be it real or supernatural, that's trying to claw its way into these ships, that's hunting them whenever they go out on excursions. It's hunting them. In the book, it's kind of, left up to your kind of imagination a little bit to begin with, what it might be. Is this a supernatural entity? I mean, the sailors do run across a native, I was going to say Native American Alaskan, but a Native Alaskan, but it's Canada. It's the Inuit, an Inuit Native North American Inuit tribe member ends up being part of the story. And a lot of the sailors think that this Inuit tribe member is bringing a curse upon them, but then the half of the crew is like they're glad to have this Inuit lady with them. Um, and so you've got that. And then you've got this horrible thing that is chasing them around. And in the book, you know, you can picture a cool whatever in your head. In the movie, here's the thing, and the movie is filmed artistically. It's filmed brilliantly. It's got a great mood to it, a great atmosphere to it. Great actors in it that you'll recognize. Actors from Game of Thrones and Outlander and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. There's a lot of great actors in this. And everybody's doing a phenomenal job. And everything is sailing along great until about halfway through the miniseries when the creature shows up. And I don't know what they were thinking, but they took a movie that looked gritty and realistic and pretty fucking cool and put this CGI monster in it that just looked like a damn cartoon. And it was just dopey as... And I'm just going to be straight up. I'm just going to think whoever the art director was on that, really, really, I mean, a junior high school kid working on his 1989 Macintosh computer could have come up with something better. I swear to God. Just, here's the thing. It should have just been a polar bear. But they made it like a cross between a polar bear and a lizard and a dragon or whatever they made it, or like a hairless cat. It looked like a polar bear bred with a hairless cat and a dragon. That's what it looked like, and it was stupid. They should have just, I mean, the polar bears from the old Super Bowl Coca-Cola commercials. Remember the polar bears that would drink the Coca-Colas? Those looked better and more menacing than the creation that this art director came up with. And I was just like, good criminy. I don't criticize books ever, but I'll go off on a movie like no one's business. It's because when they got that many people working on it, and when they've got that much money to spend, and then they come up with the goofiest looking, unscariest thing. They just should have just created a big, just make it a giant polar bear and have the art director of the old Coca-Cola commercials and design it. Now that would have been scary. But anyway, we've got these guys on these ships that are stranded in the ice. And of course there's power plays amongst, because there's two ships, two captains, the chain of command under these two captains, and some of these guys are noble, some of these guys are brave, some of these guys are chicken shit, some of these guys are stupid and make stupid decisions, and some of these guys are just straight evil. And we've got all of these people, all of these men stuck in this situation that they can't escape, and the claustrophobia of it, and the freezing temperature of it, and the supernatural polar bear-ish dragon, fucking hairless cat, creature, whatever, trying to claw its way into, and then every time they venture out, this thing kills them, and it's just a bloodbath. I mean, the story starts out with 300 of some odd men between these two ships, and I'm telling you, it's like The Heart of the Ocean, that movie and that book, where only like 50, well, in reality, in the real story, we don't know what happened. Clearly they all died. In this book, spoiler alert, there's a lot of death in this. Okay, so what do I think of the book overall? I'm going to give a rating for the book and the movie. The book, 10 out of 10. I've already mentioned this many times on my channel that it's one of my favorite novels, and I loved rereading it. It was just absolutely delightful. Absolutely cool. Everything, 10 out of 10. Perfection in literature. The movie could have been. I would have given this a solid 8.5, the miniseries. Since they decided to have dumbass as an art director that came up with the stupidest looking thing I've seen in a long time on the television, with the creature, the supernatural polar bear, dragon lady, hairless cat, whatever it was, I have to drop this from an 8.5 down to like a 4.5. I mean, that's how much I hated it. I actually laughed out loud the first time I saw it on screen. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And then I giggled like a schoolgirl. or whatever. I giggled uncontrollably. Let's just say that.